Good evening, everybody. Hope everyone's keeping well today. We are in, it's now the 22nd of August, and we are on Learning Unit 4, Theme 1 and 2. I did a pre-recording on Learning Unit 3, so please look out for those slides under your More Resources tab. Did create an announcement for it. The recording is uploaded on the YouTube channel as well. If you don't have access, please let me know. I have confirmation from a few students that they do have access, so I'm pretty sure it is for everybody. So today's session, primarily what we're focusing on is forecasting. So from a forecasting perspective, with regards to your POE, it does feature as a question. And there's a little, obviously the case study is based on Jaguar, and then forecasting does feature there, I think under question 3, if I'm not mistaken. So we're going to do a little bit of case study scenarios today in class. I'm hoping that a few more students join us so we can keep it a little bit more interactive. But I'll kick off on some of the content pre-case study, and then we can just work on the case study together in class. Okay, so we asked the question on what is forecasting. So for those of you who haven't been influenced by forecasting before, forecasting is basically the process of understanding what your predictions are about future events that would happen within your organization based on historic data and any analysis, any modeling, etc. It is primarily used for planning in terms of inventory management. So that is mainly what happens. So depend on what sort of industry you're at, forecasting becomes very key in terms of where your order management needs to start and finish. So sort of from a scenario to give you an example on forecasting, I'm using an example for a company that sells winter jackets. Okay, so just to sort of build a narrative around what forecasting is. So this company sells winter jackets, and they want to predict how many jackets they will sell in the upcoming winter season. So they use different historic data, any market trends, and any external factors to create a forecast. Okay, as we go further on in the session, there is a full-on 6-step process in terms of forecasting or accurate forecasting, which we will go into detail about. But just from a very brief understanding perspective, the historic data that this specific winter jacket company would use is data over, let's say it's a past 3 years to 5 years, and it concerns mainly the winter period. And it shows sort of growth in sales each year due to having colder winters and them expanding their marketing over those years. So the average growth that they saw over that time horizon is 10% per year. From a market trend perspective, they need to understand what's happening within the market. So they're seeing an increase in demand for sustainability. So something that is eco-friendly, can be reused or recycled. So as a result of that, they introduce an eco-friendly jacket line that expects to attract newer customers to their product. External factors, so as per weather forecast over that specific time period, there's a colder than usual winter that happens, year on year. And the company then factors in the expected higher demand based on the winter period that is expected in the current year. So they use various methods, which we will go through, on how they maintain or analyze the forecasting. But one of it is time series forecasting, which basically uses a model called moving average, which basically analyzes their sales data and projects the trend for the new season. And qualitative, which means they're consulting sort of industry experts who believe that having the sustainable clothing with the eco-friendly line will grow their business by, let's say, 10 to 15% this current season. So based on this information on historical data, market trends, and any external factors, the business, this winter jacket company, is predicting a 12% increase in sales due to weather conditions, the new eco-friendly line. So if they sold 10,000 jackets last year, they're forecasting that they'll sell 11,200 jackets this year for the upcoming winter season. So in the basic of it is that the forecasting then helps the company decide how much of inventory they need to actually order, how much of staff or resources they require in order for them to either increase their marketing campaigns, or whether it's a sort of assembly line production that they have, how much of staff they need on the floor to physically assemble the item together, and also any sort of uh, networking or processing that needs to happen within their organization or their business in order for them to be sustainable and for the next year grow that added on 10 to 12%. So this is basically what forecasting is, using past data to understand where you are going to be from a current perspective, so you can ensure that you have basic ordering quantities available, and you'll be able to counter the demand that the market is seeing, and you're able to supply that demand. Okay, so we'll move on to the different types of forecasting. And I did mention time series and qualitative right now when I created the narrative on what forecasting is. So a lot of this is stuff that you need to understand and stuff that you can read through from a textbook perspective. But the different types of forecasting, and I'll start with time series forecasting. Okay, number one is your moving average, which I just spoke about, and it's your average past data over a time, which smooths out where your fluctuations from a short-term perspective sits, and highlights any trends that can be seen in the future. Exponential smoothing basically looks at what your recent observations are in the market, so that you'll be able to predict any future value. So if there is a change, for instance, in the weather currently from an observation perspective, you can then create what future value it's going to hold in terms of your inventory or your forecasting. And then ARIMA, which is auto-regressive integrated moving average, which is quite a complex model. So it uses a lot of statistics, and it incorporates more data from a past value and a past error to predict anything from a future. Then we have causal or econometric forecasting, which has regression analysis. So all the forecasting types that I'm going through, I know it does seem like it's pretty hectic in the beginning, but as you read more into it, you'll understand how a lot of the forecasting can be used when you're looking at data from a data analysis perspective and a research methodology perspective. So if you do at some stage plan on doing anything from a postgrad or an MCOM or an MBA, you'll be expected to do thesis work. So when you do thesis work, you use a lot of forecasting trends and forecasting matrix, which is everything that's here, to understand data, to understand opinions, understand surveys, questionnaires, and how do you now put this into a data-driven statistical model so you can interpret and analyze results from. So going back into regression, it uses sort of relationships between something that is dependent and independent to predict outcomes, like a sales forecast, for instance, on where your marketing is being spent. So we can use both of those factors from a dependent and independent variable to understand the forecasting. Multiple regression uses a lot of your independent variables. And structural modeling or equation modeling combines both regression as well as multiple regression to give you sort of a relationship between your different variables that you're working with. Qualitative is not so much number related, but more so opinion related. So from a Delphi method perspective, it's gathering expert opinions through questionnaires to reach a consensus from a forecast perspective. So for instance, if we go back to the winter jackets company, it's going into the market and speaking to people that are experts in, let's say, the retail sector or the clothing manufacturing sector, and getting their opinions so that you can help build your forecast. Market research using interviews, focus groups, or maybe using consumers, so people like me and you that would purchase the items, to understand what is our likes and what is our dislikes, so you can forecast what the future consumer behavior is going to be. Not everybody would have the same opinion, but having a good or a big enough sample set or sample size will be able to give you the gist of what the market is speaking about. And then scenario planning is developing different future scenarios based on different assumptions and estimated outcomes for each. So when we go through the case study, you'll see we'll do a lot of scenario planning. And scenario planning basically, it allows for flexibility, especially in a market that is a little bit more volatile. There's a lot of things that is thrown at a corporate business or any business at that in that matter, and it's how they now can navigate the situation based on what the scenario is. So COVID, for instance, I know we often speak about COVID, but that was a scenario that nobody thought would exist, or the fact that we would go into lockdown and the impact that it's had on many businesses. So it's estimating that in case something like this does happen, what is our recourse thereafter? Judgmental forecasting, which is opinion related again, so expert opinion, relying on the knowledge and your expert's opinion to, or those people with experience to make different predictions, because sometimes having historic data can be a little bit more limited. It's also based on the resources that's available and the information that is available. And then intuition or experience-based forecasting, it basically is making an educated guess based on your own experience from a business perspective, as well as what your knowledge is in that specific industry. And then we have financial-based forecasting, which means you are predicting what your future financial performance is going to be, what your revenue would be, what your expenses, what your cash flow. So a lot of financial forecasting and budgeting happens in every business. So now we're sitting at 2024. A lot of corporate businesses start maintaining what their forecast budget is going to be for 2025. A lot of them look at market industry or historical trends to see what their growth factor was in the last 5 years. Based on that, they would then put in a forecasted budget of, let's say, 5 to 10%, for instance, and then they work out what their revenue is, what their costs should be. So they are now working towards what a budget should be. And then profit forecasting is predicting future profits based on what your revenue and your costs look like. So pretty simple, pretty easy. I think if you read through it and as you go through your case study, you'll be able to understand a little bit more, and you'll be able to have a better picture painted for you in terms of what the type of forecasting is. You'll see how you'll use some of these when you are physically doing your case study. So just understand it holistically as well. Any questions so far? Okay. So then we move on to time horizon. Okay, so this is when you are doing your 6-step forecasting, it's very important to understand what your time frames and your timelines are. So in order to be successful, an organization should be effective in planning both from a short-term perspective and a long-term perspective. So it's classified into 3 time frames or 3 time ranges. So the first one is short range horizon. So this is anything from a few weeks to about 12 months. So the short range is planning, what your purchasing transactions are. So what are you now spending your money on? In terms of how many orders you got, how are you scheduling your jobs from a manufacturing perspective, or if you are an importer, how are you scheduling it from a delivery perspective? How do you now put in measures to ensure that your labor, your workforce can withstand the forecast that you are now predicting? What is your cash or your budget requirements? What is the correct levels of production that you require? So like in the short term that you forecast your time required for preparing for like a test and an exam. So that's basically what a short range horizon is. From a medium range horizon, it can be anything from 12 months to 5 years. A medium range horizon is used for what is your sales plan. So how do you now develop a pipeline? Who's your customer? Who's your market? What are the products that you are selling? Is there any introduction of new products that you're bringing into the market? What is then your production plan? From a capacity perspective, how much of capacity do you need? What is your budget that you're looking at? And in the space of, from a learning perspective, your medium range is what, from a study fees perspective, what do you need to cover your 3 years to do an undergrad degree? So that is mainly from a planning perspective, how you will now categorize medium range. Long range is usually from 5 years and upwards, and it's used for new capital expansion projects. So if you are planning on moving location, for instance, and you trying to get somewhere where it is more regional spatial, meaning that it's closer to your customer, or is it closer to your supplier? So understanding where you need to be from a location perspective, and are you then expanding operations so that you can produce more, have more raw materials, have more stock on hand, have a better inventory management flow, and then a lot more from a research and development. So if you are developing new products, what sort of R&D now goes into it, what quality control goes into it. So it's more from a long-standing perspective, and bring it back into the example, it's sort of forecasting what you want to do when you finish your studies. So that's what time horizon is, and that's where all the different categories, forecasting is placed in it. And it depends what type of forecast you're using, what market you're sitting in, what industry you're sitting in, and then it'll feature, different ranges of forecasting, either short-term forecasting or medium to long-term forecasting. Okay, then we're going into accurate forecasting. So you understand, rightly so, why do you need an accurate forecasting? So in order for business decisions to be made, you need to understand what your forecast is going to be. So whether it's forecast in terms of manufacturing and production, or whether it's forecasting in terms of financial forecasting, you still need an accurate forecast to understand where you need to be. So from a financial perspective, if you're looking at it from revenue versus cost versus profit, how do you now forecast it, and what do you need in order for you to achieve that specific forecast that you've planned? If it's on the manufacturing side, what raw materials do you need? How much labor? What is the production schedule? What is your time frame in terms of production in order for you to take it forward? So the following is basically required, are requirements for accurate forecast. So the first one, it needs to be simple and it needs to be easy to understand, not only for yourself, but for all your stakeholders that's involved and part of your supply chain. So if a forecast is complicated or not that easy to understand, an employee is not very confident in using it. So it needs to be as simple as saying revenue needs to increase by 10%. If revenue increases by 10%, I know I need to bring in X amount of sales. I need X amount of salespeople to bring it in, and I need to not lose any business at all. So it's as simple as that. Forecast should be, from a goal perspective, it should be cost effective. So any benefit should outweigh the cost of doing a forecast. So you need your goal to, or you need to understand what your goal is, and it needs to not cost a lot. So when you are forecasting, you need to take this into account. Forecast should be done in meaningful units. So basically, when a department or an organization does a forecast, every person should understand what should know the amount in rand that is available to be spent, and from an operations side, what is the quantity that needs to be produced. From a finance side, how much has been spent. It's everybody needs to understand, and it needs to be broken down in categories that they would understand from a stakeholder side. Forecast should be timely, which means that every department needs to be focusing from a time perspective so that it responds to what the forecast needs, and responds to basically the time that the demand that's placed on a specific task. It should be reliable, meaning that it should work every day without fail. And if you're producing an accurate forecast at one time and it's inaccurate the next time, the employees will feel a little bit insecure on where they should be going and what they should be doing. And everything should be in writing, which means that it is used throughout the organization in every single department. So there's no room for error, and the measurements is clearly defined, the goal is clearly defined, and your time frame is clearly defined. So that's basically what accurate forecasting is. So then we move on to the steps to prepare a forecast. So NB, take note of this. This is the one that is in your POE. It is the 6 steps, and I am cheating a little bit by giving you case studies in class, but it is not the POE case study, but it's just so that I can help you understand a little bit more on forecasting. So step 1 is determining the purpose of the forecast. So why do you need it? How will it be used? Who's going to use it? And when must it be ready for use? So it gives you a little bit of an indication at which level the forecast should be prepared and what resources is required, etc. The time horizon that needs to be used. Is it short, medium, long? What is the time interval? We need to take all of this into account. So the longer the time, the less reliable the forecast then becomes. So a lot of businesses sort of look at it from a short-term perspective as opposed to a long-term. Strategies are normally 3 years. Forecast is 1 year. So that's basically business and how it works. You need to understand what technique you're using. Is it qualitative? Is it quantitative? Are you using data? You're using expert opinions. So what is the technique that you're using? Gather and analyze your data. So what is the relevant data that you require? If there's data that is not available, then the forecast may not always be accurate. And then you need to make a lot more assumptions. So then the purpose of it is then, a little bit misaligned. And then you physically are making the forecast depending on the type of product, what is the demand on the product, and you're deciding on the method that you need to use. And then the last one is continuously measuring or monitoring the forecast. So all forecasts must be measured continuously to ensure that there is compliance from every department and every stakeholder. If the actual performance is not in accordance with the forecast, then the reason should be basically investigated and it should be corrected immediately. And if the need arises, the forecast should, afterwards be revised. A lot of times when forecasted, budgets or whatever it is put into place, it is not revised. So that is your forecasted budget for the next 12 months. You have to follow it. If you don't make that specific budget, then it's why have you not made it, and how can you now rectify it going forward? So these six steps are basically very important. It needs to be pretty accurate in order for a business to comply and to make sure that they are doing what they need to do. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen quickly, and I want to move on to the case study. And I would appreciate as much input as possible, just so that we can get started. So I'm just loading a whiteboard quickly, just so we can, start talking about this. So I'm going to load sort of the basis of the case study. So based on the fact that this is a pretty simple case study, we can talk about it and we can make a little bit more assumptions as compared to in your case study in your POE that has a lot more detail. But I see we only have one person on the call. So yeah, I mean, if Marisha, if you want to join in, please step in. But I think I'll talk the way, and if you have anything, please add. So the case study here today is, so I called it LSCM Clothing Company, is planning to launch a new line of activewear for the upcoming spring season. The company wants to forecast sales to determine inventory level, production schedules, and marketing budgets. The sales team is responsible for delivering a reliable forecast to guide these decisions. Okay, so let's go into step one, right? Which is knowing what your purpose of the forecast is. Okay, so what is our purpose? Okay, so what is our purpose? Our purpose is we need to help determine the plan for inventory. We need to help determine the production, and we need to help set the marketing budgets. Okay, so those are all of the purpose of the actual budget or the actual forecast. Who's going to use it? Okay, so let's go. Let's do this. I think it's probably a bit more easier. So who will use it? Okay, so sales, okay, because this is what the sales team is actually doing, the forecasting. Marketing, because we need to do marketing budgets. Operations, from a production schedule perspective, and an inventory level perspective. And then finance, because it is a budget at the end of the day. So all of these departments will then use the forecast. The deadline, okay, here we're making an assumption because we don't have a detailed case study. So for this case itself, the forecast must be ready in, let's say, 3 months before the product launches, to allow enough time for production and marketing preparations. So it's all depending on what industry and what product you are looking at. In this case, a lot from a clothing perspective, it is forecasted at least 3 to 6 months in advance before a season, so that there is enough time from a production perspective and to get inventory into country. Okay. And then the last one is level of forecast. Okay. So from a level of forecast perspective, since this is a new line of activewear with a national launch, the forecast should be detailed enough to break it down by region and by channel. So by region, meaning different regions, let's say we are selling it to the local market or the national market. So different regions within the national market will take heavily to the product, whereas others may not. What is our target market? Are we targeting high LSM, medium LSM, or low LSM groups based on what our product is, and based on how many people are actually gym-going members or hikers or runners? So we look at it from that perspective. And also from a channel side, so it will be region and channel. And from a channel perspective, it will be Are we selling it in stores? And what stores are we selling it? Is it going to be in like Total Sports, Sportsman's Warehouse, Sports Scenes, all of our retailers like Pick and Pay Clothing, etc. And we're going to have an online element from an e-commerce sector, or where exactly is it going to belong? So that's now just knowing our purpose, right? Step 2 is choosing our time frame. So what is our time interval? In the case here, we want to do it in the short term. So that's a few weeks up until 12 months. So following the launch of the product of the new line of activewear, the company decides that, forecasting it for more than a year might be a little bit less reliable, but a sort of 6-month mark may allow them to track performance, understand sort of post-launch exactly where they need to adjust any future forecasting that's required. So here, we're speaking on from a time horizon perspective, and it will be short term. Okay. Step 3, we need to now select our technique. Okay. And the technique that you have an option to select from is both qualitative versus quantitative. Okay. So qualitative, meaning that the company will use expert opinions, people that are market related individuals, industry experts, any buyers, sales managers who have very similar experience in these sort of product launches. And then quantitative will be using sales performances, so actual data from previous product launches, different product types, what is the market conditions, etc., and what sort of trends are we using? Is it regressive? Is it multiple regressive? So understanding it from that perspective. Step 4, it is gather and analyze data. So gather and analyze data. And we can do this by having historic sales data from very similar products over the last 2 to 3 years. Any sort of market research from a consumer perspective, and looking at our competitors, how has their trends been once they've launched products that is very similar to ours. Any seasonal sales patterns, any promotional calendar data, like for instance, if it's Black Friday and our launch is closer to a Black Friday, do we immediately start with the launch on Black Friday items, or do we, is it Mother's Day, is it Father's Day, is it Easter, is it, Christmas time? What is our, promotional calendar looking like, or what is our seasonal calendar looking like? And then we have step 5, which is making the forecast. So make a forecast. And by making the forecast, you need to understand which forecasting method you want to use. So the company can use like a weighted combination of sales performance and expert opinions, so a qualitative and a quantitative. So they basically base it on the success of a previous launch, let's say of casual wear, winter wear, and they estimate 10% higher demand. So they can incorporate that with industry experts, on eco-friendly activewear, for instance. So it's understanding what that method is and what fits best with your product line. And then the final forecast is predicting how much of sales they actually need for the first 3 months or the first 6 months of their forecast. So if they're predicting, let's say, 30,000 units that need to be manufactured, they now need to break it down into different regions, different sales channels. They need to have a ring-fenced approach when it comes to online sales. So they're keeping a specific amount of units for their online website. And how do they now see that e-commerce growing? And then step 6. Step 6 is basically measuring your forecast. Okay, and by measuring the forecast, you then need to monitor or track your sales data weekly and compare it to what you forecasted. So if you forecasted on a weekly basis that you're selling 500, you need to be tracking it on a weekly basis to make sure that you are selling 400. And you need to then implement some sort of tracking dashboards, KPIs, anything that can show you in real time how much of actual sales you've done compared to your forecasted sales or forecasted inventory. And then you need to adjust your marketing spend adequately based on that. So if you see that, for instance, if you did predict in a week you can sell 400 units and you're now selling 300, but you're seeing that out of that 300, 150 of those is coming out of online sales from an e-commerce perspective, then you know you need to be pushing in more marketing into your e-commerce. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, anything from a social media that can extend to the greater public. A lot of times from an e-commerce perspective, there is different trends where you can analyze where your target market is sitting. So if from the 150, 100 is coming from the Gauteng region, then push your marketing more into Gauteng than into KZN. But if you feel on the other hand, that KZN needs to be, at the forefront, then push more marketing into KZN. So it's understanding where your locations are sitting from a delivery perspective or a consumer perspective, and what you need to do to enhance the sales in those specific product lines. Then it's making any sort of adjustment. So if your sales is deviating from your forecast by, let's say, more than 10%, you need to identify or investigate what the cause of that is. If the demand is lower than expected, you may need to scale back on production. You need to increase your promos. And if your sales is exceeding your forecast, so if your forecast is 400 and you're now sitting at 500 a week, then you now need to ramp up your production because it means you're going to end up with stockouts. So this is basically 6 steps of how you can, you can develop a forecast for an actual business. And it's pretty simple if you really look into it. And I think from a POE perspective, there's a lot more information on the Jaguar case study that can help you build a 6-step plan for this specific business. I want to go into a different sort of industry now, and similar case study or similar steps, but a different variation of it, and we're going to look at it from a cafe perspective. Okay, so a Proud Cafe, it's called Proud Cafe, a popular local coffee shop, plans to expand its operations by opening a second location in the city. The owner wants to forecast the cash flow and profitability of the new location for the first year of its operation. Accurate forecasting is crucial for securing a bank loan, planning your resource allocation, and ensuring that the business remains financially viable during the expansion. Okay, so very simple. Cafe wants to open another branch. What do we need to forecast its profitability and its success? So step 1, we need to know what the purpose of the forecast is. So the purpose is financial feasibility of a new location. What is the revenue expectation? What is the operating cost? Yes, understanding where the location needs to be. Is it a busy location or not? And what is the potential profitability of it? Obviously, we need to now apply for a bank loan to get the cafe second location up and running, and we need to attract potential investors to this. So that is our purpose. Who will use it? So the cafe owner, obviously, the financial advisor, the bank that's going to be processing a loan for us, and any potential investors that will invest in the business will then use the forecast. What is the deadline? So from a cafe perspective, because it's a small business, the forecast is extremely small. Yes, Marisha, I think a week up to a month it's as small as that. It is a small business, so it's it's using a couple of weeks to a week, just for you to meet the loan application, to meet their deadline, and ensure you secure any sort of finances that you require before you have a lease agreement that is signed. What is the level of forecast? So the forecast should cover what your cash flows are. So here it'll be cash flows, any profitability, even a break-even analysis. What do you need to basically break even in the first month or the first year? That's all that you require from a level of forecast perspective. Choosing your time horizon, okay? The forecast should cover the first 12 months at least after the location opens. So you need to understand when you do, let's say, for instance, the bank approves everything, you get your loan, hurrah. Now, how do we forecast this? We need to use at least a year after we've now opened the new location to give you an insight of what the finances are from a startup, taking into account any sort of early operating expenses. If you need to put a new countertop, a refrigerator, a coffee machine, you need to, hire 2 chefs as opposed to 1 chef. And then what is your anticipated revenue growth? So here would say roughly about 12 months, which still falls within the short sort of term period. Step 3 is what technique would you use? So a combination of techniques can be used, both from a qualitative and a quantitative perspective. So qualitative, we can say from here, they can speak to sort of industry experts, people who also have experience in expansion. So it may be a franchise owner, for instance, that expanded into multiple locations. And they can also do customer surveys and any market research to know what the demand is in a new neighborhood. So let's say, for instance, they have spoken to whoever they need to, and they understand that this specific area or this specific location or a busy location is where they want to be. So it's now doing research in that specific market and understanding whether the new neighborhood is going to be able to sustain the business or not. And then quantitative is getting sort of historic financial data from the first cafe or Proud Cafe and use this as a base for predicting sales and what your costs are going to be. So you can use like any sort of analysis from a regression perspective. So you can forecast your revenue based on your foot traffic data, and then what's your fixed and variable costs at the current location. So both qualitative and quantitative can be used. Step 4 is gather and analyzing data. So historic data from where you are currently using that revenue, that cost, that profit margin is the data that you can use. From the new location, looking at rent, your water and light, so your utilities, what is your salaries, how many employees are you bringing in for the new location based on what the labor market trends are. So if you're determining that you're having 5 employees, to be stationed at the new location, what is the market rate salaries for them, and then what is the rental which you'll have on hand, and then sort of estimated utilities. So you put all of that into a budget to gather and analyze your data. Market research in the new location from a foot traffic side. Who are your competitors? Where are your competitors now located? And what is the customer's average spend? So if someone had to walk into your new cafe, what is the expectation? Are they planning on paying $150 for the cappuccino? What is the expectation? And then customer surveys from current customers. So customers that are probably at your old location. What is the likelihood for them to visit a new location? Step 4, nothing to do. Sorry, I just want to go back to your comment there. Sorry, step 4 has nothing to do with the cafe sales per day. Not really. It's mainly from a previous sort of historic data. So gathering and analyzing data from a historic perspective. From a step 5, when you're physically making your forecast, that's when you need to include what your cafe sales are going to be per day. But if you are talking about cafe sales per day based on the previous location or the first location, yes, that you can use to gather and analyze data. But from the new perspective, you wouldn't be able to do it. You can use that in your making your forecast, which is in your step 5, basically. And then we have step 5, which is making your forecast. So using that historic data and then forecasting where you need to be. So cafes estimate on where their monthly revenue is going to start, which is, let's say 75% of where the first location is, increasing 100%, by month 6, just based on customer satisfaction, loyalty build up, etc. So, bringing all of the sales per day into account from a revenue side. Cost, what is the fixed cost, what is the variable cost, fixed being your rent and salaries, that wouldn't change, but then variables being utilities, inventory, stock, anything that you need to keep the running of the business going. And then final forecast is predicting what your revenue is, minusing what your forecast is, and then expecting what a profit is going to be. And then when is your break-even period, and then when is your month that you're going to start making profit. So a lot of times when there is startup businesses like this one, for the first 6 to 12 months, sometimes it just becomes a break-even, and profit starts happening thereafter. And then step 6, which is just basically measuring and continuously measuring the forecasting. You need to track what your monthly cash flow is based on, your revenue, cost, and your profit against your forecast. So you need to understand where you're sitting and where's the gap analysis in here. You can use a lot of, automated functions like accounting softwares, SAPs, etc., to monitor sales, expenses, as well as your profit, and then what adjustments you need to do. If your revenue is slower than what you expected it to be or slower than what you forecasted it to be, the cafe needs to do other stuff like increasing their marketing, maybe adjusting their pricing, maybe their pricing doesn't fit the new location, or they just need to cut down on some of their cost. If your expenses rise unexpectedly, let's say a supplier increases their cost by too much and your inventory or your input or your raw material ends up being higher than what you expected, how do you now either find a new supplier or maybe renegotiate a current contract, or whatever suits you and suits your business without creating any turmoil with it, is what you need to look at. Then the owner now needs to review the forecast that has been set on a quarterly basis and then change it if it's necessary. So just so that make sure that the cafe stays on track and it meets what its financial goal is, to take it forward. So that's basically a cafe example. We did an active way example. I think the example in the case study in your POE is from an automotive perspective. So it's just understanding holistically how can you do forecasting. And I think the more you look into it, the more fun it then becomes. It's something that is it's quite nice from a business perspective, especially if you're starting up. A lot of times forecasting is required in order for you to, as part of your business plan, so you can actually go forward and get a bank loan approved or finances or investors. So then I think we'll finish off. I think we've got 2 more slides left and 10 more minutes. So from a situational factors perspective, a lot of these things need to be considered in order for your forecast to be as accurate as possible. So the first one is accuracy and cost. So there's always a trade-off between it being accurate and the cost implication. So the higher the accuracy levels in terms of your forecast, sometimes the higher the cost it would be, because there's a large amount of data that's required for high accuracy on your forecast. The data is sometimes a little bit more difficult to obtain. So then the models that you end up using becomes a lot more costly. So just take that into account. We do want as accurate as possible, but sometimes the cost doesn't always speak to the same. The next one is the availability of data. Before a forecasting model or method is chosen, so either are you going quantitative or qualitative or hybrid, you need to understand what data is available and what data is relevant. Especially from a quantitative side, when you're using historic trends of data, there needs to be a large pool of information and data that is available for you, where you can use different techniques to analyze that information. Time span of the forecast. So a lot of times from a business perspective, so in forecast, information is very critical. Correct. It is very critical. Quantitatively, you need to look at historic data and historic information to develop a forecast. Qualitatively, you need to have expert opinions, surveys, questionnaires, interviews, etc., with industry people or customers, whoever is basically a stakeholder within your business. That's who you would need the opinions of. So having both of those is actually very important when you are doing a forecast. Time span, businesses look a lot at a forecast to be as far into the future as possible. That sometimes it's not always reliable, because things change, people change, businesses change, situations change. So the time frame of, or the time span of the forecast is completely relevant to where you are sitting from a business side, from a market side, and also from an external factor perspective. So you need to look at, who's your stakeholders, what is the inventory, what is your product that you're selling, and then what sort of time span do you now require from a forecast side. The nature of business, it's a method that best suits each of the products from an organization should be used. Sometimes different methods are used for different products to be forecasted. So it's just now to understand what is the different goods, what is the different services that you now need to forecast. You may need different forecasts for different goods or different services that you're providing. I am in the logistics environment, and we forecast it differently, either from a revenue perspective or a profit perspective. And we have various products that contribute to our revenue, and every product is forecasted differently. So we just look at the nature of the service that we're providing, and based on that, our percentage of forecasting then differs. Change in market. So any sort of market changes should be anticipated in advance, and it may influence the forecast dramatically. So for instance, the rand dollar rate, that can impact your forecast, especially if you are an importer of goods. That can affect you a lot. Changes in shipping, like for instance, the Red Sea scenario that we have. What is the rerouting? What is the transshipment? It's now taking 10 to 15 days longer. That's going to affect your forecasting. Port congestion affects your forecasting. You may not be able to get your product on time to a specific customer, and that can affect your sales. So anticipating all of this over a time period is very important, because this will be able to, help you further your judgment in terms of forecast. And then we have use of decision factors. So can be from a monetary perspective, a financial perspective, an inventory perspective. So what is the different decision factors that's required or needed in order for you to actually develop your forecasting? And then lastly, and I mean, this can be a simple read through, but forecasting can be effective, or the different reasons for ineffective forecasting is an organization may fail to select an appropriate forecasting model. So you may choose a model that is not applicable to your market, your product, or your service. So understanding what model or tool you are choosing is very, very important in order for forecasting to happen. Management sometimes can fail to recognize that forecasting forms a very integral part of a business and a company. So a lot of time from a management perspective, they wouldn't even set a budget forecast or a sales forecast or an inventory forecast. And unfortunately, this just doesn't give stakeholders and employees within the business a goal or an objective to work towards. So forecasting is very important, and it needs the buy-in from a management perspective in order for it to be developed. Failure to monitor accuracy of the forecast, then it means that the organization fails to improve the forecast because they're setting an inaccurate one in the beginning. So there will only be control if the forecast is changed when it does not perform as it should. So by taking all of this into account, then a forecasting would work. If it doesn't, then unfortunately, a forecasting will be very ineffective. An organization will fail to involve all the relevant people or stakeholders in setting a forecast. Unfortunately, setting a forecast is not an individual effort. It's a team effort. It involves every department from finance all the way down to manufacturing, production, inventory management. And bringing a forecast to life involves all of these people. So being a sole individual function, unfortunately, just doesn't work. And people don't buy into the forecast if they're not involved in it in the beginning. Failure to recognize from the beginning of the process that the forecast will be wrong. So forecast of demand can be influenced by many factors. One factor is forecasting error. So if you are in the beginning forecasting or error forecasting, the longer the forecast period, the larger the error would be. So you need to be very realistic, and realistic expectations needs to be set from a management perspective so that you don't have poor performances from an operation side or a financial side. And then forecasting of incorrect items. An organization, for instance, might forecast a specific quantity or unit of raw materials needed for the finished good. The correct method would be to forecast the requirements for the finished good as opposed to a raw material. So how many products do you need, and then how much raw material do you need to produce that finished good? So it's working sort of backwards to get a number as opposed to thinking about raw material and then a finished good. So I think that sort of highlights a little bit more into what forecasting is. In our next session, we are going to go more into qualitative and quantitative forecasting techniques, and using the different techniques like what's the moving average, weighted moving average, etc. There is going to be a little bit more mathematics and statistics involved in actually applying these techniques. It is going to be a recorded session, so I will record it, but I will put a whiteboard up, so I'll do the mathematics there so you would completely understand. If you have any questions post that, you can just shout and I will answer it the best way that I can. But other than that, thank you so much for today. All the best with the ICE task that's due today, and have a fantastic evening, and I will speak to you guys next week. Thank you.